kind of strange and eerie that the relationship that the Ashley family and I have had on this. He was my predecessor in the interim in the seminary for a year before I came there and started my first seminary teaching post. And then his father was the interim in my very first church in Fremont, Nebraska. And then in the first time I became, and I hope the last time, a principal, Tim was the interim there as well. Anyway, we have known each other for a number of years, and his father and I had numerous occasions together and for coffee, and his dad was well respected as a pastor, and that's why they invited him to come back. After he had retired so many times and didn't know how to, they invited him to come back because they loved him. Anyway, I want to share with you just a couple of unrelated announcements. Everything tomorrow morning up through noon is going to be at the Wolfville United Baptist Church, okay? Not at Acadia Divinity College, not anywhere else, except we'll start on the program at the Wolfville Church. And this direction, I think most of you know where it is. Afterwards, tonight, you can pick up on the way going out, if you'd like, a copy of it's the longer manuscript of what was said. These things are supposed to get published sometime, but these are first drafts. And I call them first drafts because that makes it look not quite so bad when you see all the bloopers that are found in those manuscripts. So just recognize them as what they are. And that was my attempt at an original inerrant manuscript that never worked out very well. And I'm the very first sentence, and the one that you'll get tonight is not a complete sentence. And I didn't check it and find it out until after 200 copies had been printed up. So there you go. Also, next year, now this is looking down the pike, and there's an exciting announcement about the Simpson lectureship series for next year. We are really excited about the person, and I'm going to save that until Dr. Bob will share with you tomorrow night all of the details. Everything was confirmed today, and all of the details of it were confirmed today, and he will share that with you tomorrow night. But you have something really to look forward to next year in the Simpson lectureship series, and we're excited about it. But I'll just sort of lay it on you right now, and it might mean that you'll want to go home already. Next year, for the very first time, we're going to have to ask that folks will contribute a registration fee of approximately $20 to help us defray the cost. There's a whole bunch of costs that are related, and the person coming next year is not as cheap as I am. As a matter of fact, the fact that you paid nothing for coming tonight suggests how cheap the one is. But next year, it'll have to be, and I think we're looking at roughly about a $20 registration fee. And that's a typical thing. I think not too many people will go broke on it. And if anybody has a tough time, we want them to come. Just clue us in ahead of time, and Dr. Ashley will take care of it out of his pocket. He really I'd like to start by sharing with you a story of a rancher out in Saskatchewan, raises cattle, and was known for his generosity. He needed some help. He had some cattle that had gotten out of beyond his fences, and he needed somebody to go out and round up the cattle and bring them in, and also repair the fences. And so he went to the marketplace to try to find somebody, and he found two people. And he hired them, and oh, were they grateful. They had been without a job and income, and he paid them a lot of money. He gave them more than double what they thought that they would get. And they were so excited at what they were going to get that every morning, instead of going out to round up the cattle and mend the fences, they went to his window and began to tell him through the window all the terrific things that he had done for them. Now, of course, it pleased him that they were grateful. And they kept going on. Nobody has ever paid us this much money before, and we really appreciate all that you have done. Nobody could have done as much for us as you have done. Now, the rancher appreciated their comments, but they never got the job done. And so he had to go hire somebody else to bring the cattle in and fix the fences. Now, of course, that's a metaphor. I believe that God has given us a job to do. And nobody will get a higher salary than what God gives to His children. But God also wants us to get out there and do it. To bring the cattle in and to mend the fences. And if we don't, God will have to get somebody else. There are folks that are very content with just having wonderful worship experiences. And I love them. They're mountaintop moments. And we praise God for all that God has done. But God has also given us a mission. God has given us a task. And if we don't get around to doing it, we're not of much use to God. And God can get somebody else, and often does, to take our place. One of the most important things that the church can do, this side of glory, and it's the only thing that I know of, this side of glory, that we can't do on the other side, is to bring the cattle in. Is to bring people to faith in Jesus Christ. That is the mission of the church. Everything else that we do as God's people can be done on the other side of glory, and even more time spent doing it there. But we cannot bring the lost into the fold on the other side of glory. That's here. And so as much fun as we might have and enjoyment, and I love worship as much as anybody does, and God speaks to me and touches my heart through that, as much as that is true, God still has a job for me to do this side of glory. And God wants our praise, but God also wants our service. I appreciate what the Germans call worship services. They call them Gottesdienst. That is the service of God. Now, what we do on a Sunday morning also serves God. But God has a mission for us in this world. And there's two things that go together in that mission. And they're both absolutely, vitally essential. And the first of those, of course, without evangelism, no one will become a follower of Jesus. And without discipleship, no one will become a devoted follower of Jesus. And you must have both. This is not an either or. And people don't come into the kingdom very often. It happens once in a while because of simply discipleship. But they come because someone gives them an opportunity to invite Jesus Christ to come into their life, to transform their lives, and to give them the new life that God wants to give them. Somebody has given them that opportunity, and we call that evangelism, telling good news. And evangelism, the word itself means, of course, good news, euangelion. The verb form is to proclaim the good news. All that God has for us in terms of mission is related to that good news. We are a good news community. And even our worship ought to be tinged with good news. I believe that with all of my heart. I've been to worship services that look like bad news. And I've heard people preach on hell like they were glad everybody was going there. I think we're a good news community. And there's good news to proclaim. And people don't find that right relationship with God apart from having that encounter with the living Christ, inviting Jesus Christ to come into their life to transform their lives. So when that takes place, there's something else that's very important. It's essential, and that is that we get them involved in some kind of a growing relationship with God where they learn to walk with the Lord, and their lives continually are transformed from glory to glory in the discipleship program. Churches that opt for one or the other are fooling themselves. And if you just have the discipleship without the other, of course you will never draw a community of faith together in the first place. We must have both. And in the New Testament, we call that didache, of course, and rather kerygma and didache, or preaching and the teaching ministries of the church. Both are absolutely essential. You cannot separate them if you're going to accomplish what God has asked you to do. Now, there's this may or may not be of much use to anybody in here, but I just wanted to get it up so I wouldn't think or forget to say the thing about the nurseries. Somebody said a number of years ago that God will not put a baby where there is no nursery. And that's a part of the discipleship. The nursery is where we take care of babies. And in the church, when people come into the church and no one takes care of them, they eventually will drift away. I'll say a little bit more about that later, but when I became a Christian, I did so in an evangelistic crusade in a church in Phoenix, Arizona. And I was so excited. My life was changed. I was so happy. I couldn't articulate anything. I couldn't say what had happened. I just knew something wonderful had happened in my life. And on the way going home, the person that brought me to the evangelistic service said, "What do you think of all of that, Lee?" And I said, I'm so happy I want to shout. I don't know what to say. This is overwhelming. And within a few weeks, I found out I could still sin. Some of you knew it sooner than that. Some took longer. And I thought I was the only one at church that did. And I was very discouraged because try as I would, I found out I would still do things and say things that I ought not to do. And I was discouraged in my Christian faith. But there was some person, the one who brought me to the church, also took it as his responsibility to care for me when I became a Christian. He sowed the seed and all the other kinds of things, and he tilled the soil to make sure that I was ready to respond to the gospel. And when I became a Christian, this person spent countless hours with me. There's one story about him. I was living in Phoenix, Arizona, apart from my family at the time. I came from a broken home, and the family took me in, but they were not Christian people. And this fellow wanted to make sure that I went to church. And every Sunday morning he came by to pick me up to go to church. And after a couple of months, I didn't want to go to church anymore. I was on guilt trips. And I didn't feel worthy. And I was really feeling bad. And I remember on one occasion he knocked on the door and I came and he said, "Lee, it's time to go to church." I said, "No, I'm not ready to go this morning." He said, "Well, what do you need to do?" "Well, I don't even have a shirt ironed." He came into the house and he ironed the shirt. He took me to church. And again, spent hour after hour after hour. Every person that I had ever met, I'll get into that yet. Every person that I have met who has grown in his or her Christian life and experience has had somebody to care for them and to spend a lot of time with them, mentoring them in their spiritual journey. I don't know of any exceptions of people who have gone into Christian ministry who said, "One day I want to accept Jesus as my Savior," and nobody else ever came around and spent any time. I had a pastor that I would go into his office at about 1.5 inches tall, and I would always come out about 10 feet tall when that pastor talked with me, prayed with me, and encouraged me in my spiritual journey. Everybody needs that experience to grow in their Christian life. They need that discipleship. And if a church cannot provide it, and nobody is there to do it, God will send people elsewhere because He does not bring babies into churches that have no nurseries. Our mission is to produce fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. I know that there are a number of churches that are so committed to discipleship, they do their best to limit their evangelism. Now that sounds strange, isn't it? George Barna was the first to tell me about that. in his book, Habits of Highly Effective Churches, he mentions that churches try to limit their evangelism, their recruitment of new people to 15% per year because most churches can't handle more than 15% of new people per year and get them involved and assimilated in the life of their churches. One of the things that I'm going to do tonight is, last night I went a long time overtime, and I'm going to skip through a bunch of stuff because I got it all out in a manuscript, that flawless thing that you can pick up on your way going out tonight, for the same price as last week. By the way, we haven't had a taker yet for that endowing of the chair, but we're still hopeful before the time is over. You can get it absolutely free going out. There's a number of things about the people that we're hearing today, or that are hearing us, that you've heard the categories, and those are the most common ones down toward the bottom. Those who are in the seniors category, you're considered a senior in North America if you're 68 years of age and older. You're considered a builder, and you have a different value system if you're 49 to 67. And you're a boomer, you've heard that one, between 30 and 48, and a buster between 11 and 29, and children if you're under the age 11. Xers are somewhere in there in their late teens and early 20s. And you hear all of these terms bandied about. I'm going to spare you all of the characteristics of this group, but I'd like to say just a couple of things in passing. One, in terms of the family, is that there really is no typical family in North America today and in Europe. There's all kinds of characteristics about the people that go into the families, and I've listed a few of them there. And honey, you can move on to the next page, number 4. But there are a number of studies about the people that you can look at these yourself. There's characteristics of the folks that are out there. But most of the studies, it's number I on this transparency, no longer conclude that there's a typical family anywhere. It just simply doesn't exist. And 47% of the households are single. It's amazing how often churches have ignored singles kinds of ministries. And I've seen churches that were seemingly thriving, doing quite well, and there was no place for singles. I know it would never happen in your church where a single would come to church and nobody would greet them. And nobody would say anything. But you get a young couple, sharp-looking young couple with children, wow, they trounce on them, right? Saying, welcome to our church. But here comes a single. I mentioned a fellow whose name of Dick is a friend of mine. He was a professor at a school in the Midwest that I knew quite well. And it's a Christian school. He and I played chess together from time to time, and over a chess game one time, I said, Dick, what church do you go to? And he said, I don't. I thought he was joking, and I laughed. And he said, no, I'm serious, Lee. And I said, what do you do? And he said, well, I go to chapel at the school. He said, churches are for married people. And he said, he was in his early 40s. And he said, nobody has invited me home for dinner in years at my church. So I stopped going. They thought you were kind of weird if you weren't married by the age of 30. There was something definitely wrong with you. But 47% of society is single in North America. That's a lot. And when you think in terms of that singleness, some of it is by choice. They've never married. Some of it is they're single again. And some of it is single because of personal tragedies, the loss of someone, and so on. And that would typically fall into the latter category. Churches have to find ways to deal with the singles ministries. And Dick's story is one that I try to tell as often as I can, that churches sometimes ignore those who are singles. And all churches can't have a thriving singles ministry. But all churches can cooperate with fellow churches, and I don't care if they're the same denomination or not, to provide something for singles to have a place to meet. 55% of singles who marry again meet in churches, in church activities. And churches can do that in wonderful ways, and if we were not trying to do kingdom building of our own personal kingdoms, but the one kingdom that really matters. Churches can do an awful lot by cooperating with other churches in their communities to try to reach this particular group. There's a number of things about them. I'm not going to go into it all together, except the last one, the last two. It's page 6. There's several things in the value system that are on these transparencies of the population today, and especially the younger population. But among some of the most common things is a value system that we have to address in the preaching of the gospel. The first of these, of course, is that physical beauty is to be valued over simplicity. You see this on the commercials. How many ugly people do you see in commercials and TV? You can count them on one hand compared to the thousands of these handsome and gorgeous other people. Wealth is superior to poverty. Mobility is better than incapacity. Higher IQs are more important than those who are lower IQs. And youth is always more important and better than those who have maturity. Those value systems that the generation has are clearly wrong. They fly in the face of biblical teaching. And how do we confront that value system? Certainly we confront it with the value system of the Bible, the value system of what the gospel is all about. But it's important that we confront it as caring as we can, but to say there is a better way. Interestingly, also, the generation is committed, and I think not just due to something in the generation. They've been bombarded for a generation on consumerism and greed. Some of you, I don't know, I just saw the advertisements on the movie a few years ago, Michael Douglas, on the movie Greed. And he said, greed is good. That was the part of the promo that kept coming out over and over again. And that was discussed pretty much across the country, North America. It was discussed about, is this really where we've come to? And many people said, yeah, in fact it is. And look at the commercials. You've got to have this product. I mean, how are you going to get by without this product? And guess what goes with it? It's that beautiful woman who's driving it. Or I saw monkey wrenches being sold with a woman in a bikini bathing suit on one occasion. I couldn't figure out how the two related. I'm getting old, and I understand that. What kind of church is the church that will attract the younger generation today? And we don't have an option to say, look, why don't we just check out of this generation? We don't like their value system. We don't like what motivates them. Let's just forget them and wait for another one to come along. The next one isn't any better. And the church has an opportunity to have an impact upon their lives. What is it that they're looking for in their churches? Some of you already know. Worship that is aimed at their hearts, not just at their heads. And that might be, and I put perhaps a postmodernist influence. And music that has rhythm, and it has simple, everyday words that they can understand. They're asking for those kinds of things. Preaching that has simple, everyday words as well. I remember my favorite quote from Harry Emerson Fosdick, who was a great preacher of a previous generation and pastored the Riverside Church in New York. He talked to a group of pastors on one occasion, and he said, the biggest mistake pastors make on a Sunday morning is assuming that everybody comes to church wondering what happened to the Jebusites. Nobody cares. There was a cartoon in Christianity Today's Leadership magazine some time back, and it shows a man sitting on the edge of his bed. And he's talking to his pastor on the phone, and he says, Pastor, my wife has left me. My kids have run away. I lost my job. Tell me, am I Calvinist? Am I predispensational? Am I dispensationalist? Or what? That sort of brings it into focus, doesn't it? And I'm not for sloppy work in our theology. But most people who come to church on a Sunday morning don't care if we're dispensationalists or Reformed theologians. They don't care if we're superlapsarians or Labrador retrievers. They're all if we don't have a message that impacts where they're living and tells them what Christ can do to change their way of living and the hopelessness that they have and that they face, we don't have anything for them. This generation also, very interestingly, is for prayers that are simple and unread and what they classify as authentic prayers. They love visual images. They love drama scenes. They love a celebrative atmosphere that is also positive, thankful, and filled with anticipation. They don't like guilt-trip sermons. Sermons that say, you should, don't go over well with the younger generations. And my kids reminded me of that when I would tell them they should. They didn't like that at all. What they prefer instead is a challenge. Here is something neat, a terrific opportunity. And if you really want to walk with Christ, consider A and B and C. That works 10 times better than guilt trips of the oughts and the shoulds. They prefer variety to routine and ruts. And if you're going to attract the younger ones, here's something that a number of churches have picked up on already. You got to have a good nursery. Their most prized possession is a child. And they're not going to put their child in a dirty nursery or a gloomy nursery. They want to put it in a clean, happy place. And it looks like it's well cared for. It's well kept. By the way, they're also impressed when they drive down the street and see churches that have playground equipment on their campuses. That is a big plus, by the way, because it says to the whole community, kids are welcome here. I've seen churches have nothing that looked like it would attract anybody that was young. What a pity. They do also like it, something that all of us who had children and took our children to church know about. We changed our children. Generally, the only place where you could lay a child down at the church was on the floor or on a pew. And sometimes there were spills. And it's kind of embarrassing. Nowadays, you go to businesses and restaurants and so on, and they have changing tables in the restrooms. Churches that are out there and doing something and wanting to attract people, they only cost about $200 per changing table. I remember when we got those in our church, all of a sudden young people started coming up to us and saying, wow, this is wonderful, having a changing table. And by the way, they went in the men's restrooms as well as the women's. Dads are also taking responsibilities for their children. And in most of the restrooms, guess what people do when they go to church? They carry things, and they have all kinds of diaper stuff, and they go into the restrooms. And churches that are interested in attracting younger folks, when convenience is a major item to them, they have little places to put Bibles and hooks to put coats in the restroom stalls and so on. It's amazing what simple little things like that say to those that you are trying to reach. On the other hand, if you're trying to care for those that have been in the church for a long time, there's some churches that haven't realized that seniors have difficulties. Some seniors have difficulty getting up and getting down in the toilets and the washrooms. And a number of them have begun, a few churches at least, to have some compassion, and they get some higher toilet bowls and they get some bars on the walls. It's amazing. They're trying to say, you folks matter to us enough. I remember we started that kind of a thing when a woman came up to me and she gave me a check and she said, whatever it takes to do this, please do this. I want to come to church, but I can't wait till I get back home, and I need to have some help in this department. I need to have a higher toilet bowl, and I need to have some bars in there, Pastor. I gave her a check back and said, we will take care of that. And she gave it back and she said, there's a number of seniors in our church, Pastor, and some of us have difficulty getting over to the sanctuary from the Sunday school class areas. Can I pay to put a rail on the side of the wall? And isn't that a wonderful thing to do, just to help some of these dear folk just to inch their way along over to the worship center? Those are things that we can do. We certainly want to attract our young people. That is our future. We don't want to lose the other ones in the process. But also, and this is not on here, typically the younger people do not like to be identified in the services. Would all of you who are visiting with us today please raise your hand? You're not going to get most of them to do it. Please raise your hand. We want to give you this, and please put this on your lapel. They don't want to be identified. There's another way to handle that issue. It's more classy, I think. They also don't like to be manipulated. Would you turn to the person next to you and tell them that you love them in Jesus? And those that you tell, would you turn back and say, and I love you in Jesus too? If somebody has to tell me to say that I love them, somebody else, what kind of love is that in the first place? That's sloppy agape, I think. There's not much substance to it. Manipulation is not in. Well, how can we reach these people with the gospel? The good news is we have something that they want. And sometimes they don't know how much they want it until we tell them. Every person, I'm not going to give you the sermon on it, run out of time. Whoa. Every person wants to live, and they find themselves dying. And they want meaning to life, and they find that there's not an awful lot of meaning to life. With the invention of the telescope, they find that they're nothing more than a speck of sand on a seashore of galaxies, and they want to have meaning. And the gospel that we preach, Jesus said, I am come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. And folks, I don't know of anybody else out there that's doing that. And who gives me significance? What makes me feel important? I had difficulty looking in the mirror for years because there was a fellow in my 7th grade who came up to me and he said something that I realized was true immediately. And it so frightened me, I didn't want to look again for a long time. He was a handsome guy, and all the gals wanted to be with him. And during a break one time, he walked up to me and he said, Lee, God, you're ugly. And I just stood there for a moment. I went home and looked in the mirror, and I agreed with his assessment. Wow, that was tough. There was a day when there was a young woman who treated me with such kindness and respect, and she fell in love with me, and she told me I was terrific, and all of a sudden I looked in the mirror again and said, that's not too bad. God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him would not perish but have everlasting life. You can't imagine what meaning that gives to me to know that somebody loves me. That's true on the human level, and I've seen the most homely-looking people in the world act like they're the cock of the walk. Their lives are transformed when a young woman or a young man begins to pay attention to them and says their terrific stuff, and all of a sudden they say, wow, I'm somebody. I want to be somebody. And God says, you're somebody. You're so special that I sent my Son into the world to die on a cross for you. I paid that kind of a price. I don't like the theology that says we're nothing but a bunch of filthy rags and trash. Christ didn't die for a bunch of trash. And what He sees in me, I haven't got a clue. But He says it's of infinite value. Consider the price. And that gives me meaning in life. That's what our world needs to know. We have that message. I'm thankful to God that we do. But also knowing the community and knowing the power of the gospel to change. We need to know the communities that we're in and know that the message that we proclaim in Jesus Christ has a power to it to transform lives. And unless we understand that, we don't go any further. Healthy churches attract people to them. They attract these kinds of people. And I mentioned last night again, the healthy churches are those that are involved in evangelism, those who have a significant teaching ministry, this is Acts chapter 2, verses 36 to 47, those that are involved in sharing, in fellowship, those that are involved in breaking of bread together, those that are involved in prayer. And churches that are doing those kinds of things are healthy churches. And we can enable people to experience God through worship, through fellowship, through service in a church, you can't imagine when somebody gets a chance to do something for God in a church, what that does for them. They gave themselves away, didn't ask for a penny in return, and they came back feeling so good. I often share the story of a Sunday school class in Fremont, Nebraska, in the church that Tim's father preceded me in. The Sunday school class was a group of young folks in their 30s and 40s, and they wanted to do something for somebody else. And on one day, there was a man whose wife had passed away. She was a marvelous servant of Christ, and the man himself was trying to take care of things as best he could, but he wasn't very good at it. And he had a house that had 3 steps getting up into the floor, into the main floor of his house, and was only that level. And it would take him 20, 30 minutes to make those steps. That was hard. And others would get him to church, and it would take him a long time to get up the stairs. His house was getting in worse shape. And the Sunday school class decided they were going to take on Jack as a project. And his house was kind of in shambles and falling apart. But I remember when they put Jack up for a few days with another family, they asked him if they could kind of fix up things for him a little bit. They went through, carried out all kinds of trash. They painted every room in the house. Walls were yellow, and cleaned it all up. Had the draperies cleaned, hadn't been cleaned in years. Painted the outside of the house. They returfed the lawn, and then they built a ramp coming out of his house with a little handrail. And then I got a call, said, "Pastor, come on over. We want you to be here. We're going to bring Jack back." And I still remember Jack. And before Jack got there, there was a man who was a banker who was in his jeans and T-shirt, and he'd been working night and day trying to help with this project. And he said, "I have never worked so hard in my life and felt so good." And when Jack came to the house, they got him out of the car, he just saw the outside of the house, and Jack was trying to say thank you, and his jaw was quivering, and he couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't get it out. And everybody was going like this, all over the place. That kind of service, you can't pay enough for that feeling. And when you give your life away for the cause of Christ, as Jesus said, those who seek to save their lives, the consumers lose it. And those who give their lives away for my sake and the gospel's, they find it. We need those kinds of things to be able to give people, and the churches that allow them to have a meaningful worship experience and fellowship and service and provide a friendly atmosphere, they attract the people of our generation. Now, a few tactics in here. Let me just run through rather quickly. I gave you my criterion last night about why I think we can use all things and go to all ends to win people to faith in Christ, as long as it has some integrity to it. I suggest to folks, and these are some things that have worked in some other places. Churches need to advertise that they're there. And I've heard pastors say, "Everybody knows that we're here." No, they don't. They see a building, but they don't know what's inside the building. Haven't been there. We decided a number of years ago in a church that I was pastoring that we wanted to try to reach a certain group of people. And it was people who turned the church out because the church never allowed them to use their minds. And whenever they raised questions in church, people trounced on them and called them pagans and everything else. And I don't know of a better place to discuss the issues of faith in the context of the church where there is faith. So we began to run some ads, and we had one that shows a picture of Jesus. And I told him at the newspaper, "We will not run this ad or pay for it if you put it on the church page ad." Those are the most boring things in the world. They often have a picture of a homely pastor and something that says "saved to serve" or some cliche, ugly as spit, and they don't accomplish anything. They're very boring. They waste a lot of money, and people don't come to church because of that. So we put in an ad about this size that shows a picture of Jesus that simply said, "He died to take away your sins, not your mind. Come to First Baptist Church where faith and thought work hand in hand." We got a lot of good responses for that. We started running a number of ads. One was the free coffee at First Baptist Church.
We don't care what it takes to get you here because we're convinced once you come and find the fellowship at First Baptist, you'll be back with or without the coffee. And then we had just a picture of a big cup of coffee on the ad with the fumes going up, and the people liked it. There was another one with our young people, and it was during the time when we were having the deprogramming from all of the people, these cults that were going across the world, really. And we had our young people sitting in a circle. There was 30 of them. They were having a good time. The youth pastor was there, and a picture of them there, and the caption underneath is, "Nobody ever had to be deprogrammed at First Baptist Church." And that went over fairly well. We got a number of people to respond to these things. There was one that we showed a picture of a man in a sport coat and tie and looked like a yuppie type, and he had tape across his mouth and an X like that. And the caption underneath said, "The only problem with churches that have all the answers is they don't allow the questions. Come to First Baptist Church, where faith and thought go hand in hand." You can see the kind of audience that we were trying to reach. And we had people in our church mad as all get out at our ads. And some of the other churches were mad too, but it brought some people in. It was wonderful. The one that was really... We had a number of our folk, unlike yours, who stayed home on Sunday morning and did their televised Christianity. So we ran one with a Sony television set with a plate of wafers on one side on the top and a communion cup. And said, "With all due regard to televised Christianity, have you ever met a Sony that offered Holy Communion?" That went over anyway. Like a lead balloon. Let me say, too, that the places where people, if they're going to look for a church in a town that has a number of churches, they'll look far more frequently to the Yellow Pages than to the newspaper. And if you put an ad in the Yellow Pages, don't make it boring. Whatever else you do, be creative and spend a fair amount of money, because half of the people that come to your church are going to come by looking at the Yellow Pages. And if you put something in there that looks like it's cliché-ish, if it doesn't offer services, have something big that stands out on the page. So everybody else will say, "Man, that church must be doing something good." Work at that ad. Make sure it says something to the people that you're trying to reach. There are a number of things about ads that you need to understand, that when you use them, make sure that they are attractive. They're not cheap trash. If they look cheap, people will think you don't have much to offer. Spend some extra bucks and make them colored and glossy, and all of a sudden people will say, "Oh, there's something good in there." And then have within the advertisements that you have the people you're trying to reach. If you want to try to reach out into the ethnic part of the community, have some people with color in your ads. If you want to have some younger people, have some people who are young in your ads. If you want to say seniors are welcome, put a group of seniors in there as well. People love pictures. The younger people love that which is in photographic form, and they love to see pictures. So if you don't have them, you're shooting yourself in the foot. But if you don't have something that's colorful and attractive, you're not doing that good of a job. In all of the advertising, you want to say to the congregation or to the people that are going to read it that your church is a church where love is the active word, and that there are not rigid rules to abide by if you're going to come here, and that everybody is welcome regardless of who they are. And this is a place where they can discover God. And something else that we sometimes forget. There are people out there that would love to learn something about the Bible. The Bible has had an enormous influence upon our civilization. And if you advertise that they can have a Bible study at your church and you offer them some options, people will show up just to study the Bible. It's amazing how much interest they have in that, along with the wanting to discover who God is and being a part of a friendly church. I mentioned in an earlier meeting, I think yesterday or today, we found the phrase "discover the joy" to be one that attracted people to the church. And in the process of wanting to get that message out, we put on the side of the church It was a big church, so the letters were about my size on the side of the wall. Discover the joy. We painted over First Baptist Church and put Discover the Joy. We still had a little First Baptist Church out in front, but on top of that, there was another sign in front of the church that said Discover the Joy. And on the south side of the church, we had big letters like this that said First Baptist Church. And somebody was asking me, how come you didn't do it on that side? And I said, we need 6 more funerals before we can. But we're gonna do it. Eventually, there are things that you need to understand. Younger people could care less if you're Baptist or Methodist or Presbyterian, and you don't have to stop being those things to attract them, but that doesn't turn them on. We had more people that talked to us about Discover the Joy, and they came to the church just to find out what the joy was all about. Baptists never did it for them. But these other things did. What does it take? What are we willing to sacrifice for the cause of Christ to reach people for Jesus Christ? The area that I came from, in Southern California, just in the last 5 years, stopped. When they are starting new churches every year, 10 to 12, but they will not fund it if you put Baptist on the outside, because that's a turnoff. Now, Baptist is a much better term in this neck of the woods than it is in Southern California. But frankly, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Lutheran, all of those don't communicate anything to the pagan community. But church does, and community does, or church Christian center does, those kinds of things. And the Presbyterian churches now are... the vast majority of their new church starts, and some of their other churches have taken the word Presbyterian off the board and simply said Community Church of Palo Alto or whatever else. What is it that we want to do? We want to attract people into the church so they can hear the good news and their lives can be transformed. Do things that are highly visible. Do you ever do anything on the church premises that draws attention to itself? Why is it? We had a movie theater across the street from our church. Had 12 screens in it. Neon lights all the way around the building. Wow. And nobody ever noticed our church. We didn't have a light on it at all. Finally, we got one on it, and it wasn't colored. It just looked boring and bland. We repainted it, not in psychedelic colors, but in attractive colors that would get somebody's attention, where they'd go by and say, that's not too shabby. That's all right. What is it that we need to do? I think all things, by all means, in order to win some. Let me jump from that, bottom of page 12, darling. I only have a few minutes to deal with a very important topic, and that's the area of discipleship. So let me just tell you a story or two about discipleship. And what has worked elsewhere. It may not work here. Just take it for what it's worth. Coming from an American, divide by 3. It's all right. Maybe 4 or 5. I did something none of you have ever done before. When I went to my last church, for 3 full years, I complained about my predecessors, who gave me such an immature collection of leaders. I had never met anybody that was so pagan in their orientation and thinking. And all I did was sit and complain about it for 3 years. And it really made me feel good. And I would go to pastors' conferences. Well, how's it going over there? And if my predecessor had done his job right and trained me some decent leaders with some spiritual maturity, well, you can imagine after doing that zealously for 3 years that I got the problem fixed, didn't I? During those 3 years, there was a very fine, capable servant of Christ in the church, a layman, who interestingly is from Canada, Saskatchewan. And he said in my first year, Lee, don't you think we need to start some discipleship classes to help new believers grow in their faith? And don't you think we need to do something to help people who've been here for a while and haven't grown, and at least give them the opportunity to grow in their faith? And it took me 3 years to figure that out. And he was absolutely right. When we finally got around to doing something about it, I began to read as best I could, and I stole, as I told the folks this afternoon, I've never had one original thought in my life, and everything that I've ever done I got from somebody else. And I heard some things. I read, I was trying to find something on discipleship for Christians, and I found John Stott's Basic Christianity, which I really appreciated. He had another volume came out, Authentic Christianity, and I said, I've got to find something to do with that. I read a volume, Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Church, a very well-known volume now. He did some things with some classes to try to get people to have an opportunity to grow in their faith. And we began to do the same kind of a thing, and we set up some classes and started them off, and page 13, whatever one we're on. I'll just mention these and wrap it up here. We wanted to have a seeker-friendly inquiry class. An inquiry class, sometimes known as a membership class, we called it and made it as best we could as free a class as possible, not assuming that people were going to join the church. We advertised it, just come and find out about who we are. Now, the church wanted every person who was going to join to go through that class, but you didn't have to become a member. And about 30 to 40% of the people that came to the class never joined the church. But they gave me one full day of their time. We did it all in one day because it was easier to get them there on one day than try to have 5 or 6 weeks in a row. And when they'd miss one class, they'd miss another class, and to get them all there. And some of them fell in love with their Sunday school classes already, and I felt terrible taking them out of those classes. So I put it on a Saturday. We met from 9 o'clock until 2 o'clock, sometimes 2:30. But we focused on these particular areas about what is a Christian. Often people want to join a church, and what they really mean is they want to become a Christian. So we start with that very issue. And then what is a church, and what's its purpose, and so on. How are churches organized? Sometimes people ask those questions, and we chart some of that stuff out. And what is a Baptist church and the basic distinctives that go along with doing that. We talked about identifying the furniture, which was really giving a part of our identity. The furniture in a church can do that. We just listed things. Look at the crosses, and what does the cross say? It has basically 2 emphases. The first is what it meant to Jesus when he died on the cross. He paid the price for your sin and mine, and it has significance for us. But also, it's a Christian lifestyle, that we are to live the way of the cross. Those who would come after me, let them take up their cross, deny themselves, and follow me. And I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice. The cross speaks volumes on that. We talked about the pulpit, the role of the proclaimed word in the life of the church. We talked about the communion table, the baptistry, and the offering plate. Everybody wants to know about that stuff and how we did it. And also, finally, the pews, how you become a member of the life of the church. And thanks for being with us. We won't ask you again to say anything. We will never ask you to join the church. It's your choice, but we're glad that you came today. If you're interested, here's a little circular that's going around. At least put your name on it saying you're here. We won't send you any more invitations, but if you're interested in being a part of the church, let us know. That was the first class. The second class went into the basic teachings of the Bible, and you can pass through those, Darlene. A basic Bible study, which is how to study the Bible. How can I get into this book on my own? And these were very well-attended classes. People started coming. We would advertise them for a month every Sunday before we would start them. Basic witnessing classes. We piggybacked on and stole Bill Hybel's stuff on contagious Christians, becoming a contagious Christian. People loved it and began to share their faith. We found people inviting friends to come to the life of the church, and they made decisions for Christ. Basic Christian living, how to walk with the Lord. Some of the basic things that go into walking with Christ, being responsible in our devotional time, our walk with the Lord, our witnessing, loving in action, and so on. Those were important areas. We had a young woman that went through a part of a class that we tailored for the young people in that same area, and it's the Missy Tafflinger story. Missy's mother was murdered, and I had the funeral for her mother. And her grandmother was raising her. And Missy had every right in the world to be disgruntled and disappointed. And when her mother died, her brother said, "I will be taking care of you." He was in his mid-30s. Her mother was 32. And 2 years after her mother was murdered, her uncle, who was going to be taking care of her, her father had abandoned her. Her uncle died, the mother's brother. And a terrible illness that came over him, and he died in a very short period of time, in about 30 days. And Missy found out that to deal with her loss and her grief, if she gave her life away, she listened to her youth pastor talk about giving your life away to be able to find what life is all about. And the people who sit around and simply sorrow all day about all of their problems never get through them very well, but those who begin to give their lives away. And her grandmother, a year ago Christmas time, gave her a lovely sweater. But she found at school there was a person from a home that was much poorer than hers, and they didn't have anything. She asked her grandmother if she could give that sweater to somebody else. And the grandmother, reluctantly, she wanted Missy to have that sweater. It was a nice one. Said, "Yes, honey, if that's what God is saying to you and what God's laid on your heart, you give it away." And then Missy got so much joy out of that, she took money that she had saved and she bought some gifts from others that she knew that were not doing well at her school. And before long, she had our whole youth program involved in putting gifts together to give to the unfortunate young people in the community and the children. And then, before long, she got a number of people at her high school involved doing the same thing. And then the firefighters in the community heard about it. They called our church and they asked about her. We put them in contact with her. And they brought 5 fire trucks down to our church. They went out collecting gifts so the young people could give them away. The newspapers came out, and the Channel 5 television station came out, and they wanted to interview me, and I said, I had nothing to do with it. I take no credit whatsoever. This is Missy. She understood what the Christian gospel was all about. And so Missy was doing her dead-level best to show the love of Christ and what it means in her community. And I think that's the kind of a thing that the gospel has got to mean in the lives of people, and discipleship leads people to do that. The good news is good news if it frees the alcoholic from his or her addiction. It is good news if it makes the unloved feel loved again. It is good news if it teaches the illiterate how to read. It is good news if it becomes a big brother to a young man, or it welcomes a young unwed mother among its fold. It is good news if it touches the hearts of people. It is good news if it introduces people to faith in Jesus Christ. If the church's primary message becomes the times and the seasons, and Jesus said it is not for you to know the times or the seasons, we will miss our mission. I know churches have spent an enormous amount of time giving on prophecy, and I think biblical prophecy in its understood fashion and in a carefully interpreted fashion is something that's good and wholesome. But Jesus said it is not for you to know. And he even said he didn't know. And there's others that think they know more than Jesus when they try to push that stuff. And I'm so glad we're finally through this millennium craze. We're still here. So are some of the others that were sure it was going to be over at the stroke of midnight a few weeks ago. There are 2 kinds of discipleship programs. One is classes for people, and I think those are very valuable. There's another one that we used with a great deal of value. It started off with 6 people that were willing to disciple younger Christians. And they would spend 8 weeks with these people, 1 to 2 hours per week, trying to teach them how to live for Christ. And it was a personal one-on-one. I didn't get it started. It was actually our worship director was so excited about it, he got it started. And then within about 4 months, there were 66 people involved, 33 sharing and 33 receiving in the discipleship. And when they were done, half of those 33 were ones that had gone through the program again. There are several of those kinds of programs that are out there that are very beneficial in helping Christ to be formed in the lives of people. When you don't do things well, and when they don't go as planned, there's a saying for it. We did all of the right things and it didn't work out. Bailey Smith says the ineffective right way of doing nothing. He speaks about a military, and I shared it with you last night, that does all of the right things. The soldiers clean their weapons. They follow the orders that they're given. They wear nice new uniforms. They wear their helmets. They have people located exactly where they ought to be. Everything is right except the enemy has crossed your lines and they're defeating you and they're destroying all of your soldiers. That means it's time to do something different. And do it quickly. If you want to get what you've always got, and I don't know where that quote comes from, I was told it was Peter Drucker. If you want to get what you've always got, then do what you've always done. And the other way of putting that is some churches are crazy enough to think that if they keep doing what they've always done, somehow it'll get different results than it's always gotten. If what we're doing isn't working, we need to find a way that changes. Bailey Smith says there are three kinds of churches: the risk takers, and then he speaks about the caretakers, and then he speaks about the undertakers, and they're always burying their dead. The big question I want to leave with you is, if we're into our love for Christ, if we want to see people coming to the church, do we have the same reputation that Jesus had? It's found in Luke chapter 15 when he was being criticized by religious people because he welcomed tax collectors and sinners. Unless we have the same love that Jesus had for sinners, we're not going to have the same impact upon sinners that Jesus had. I think that goes right to the core of it. Tony Campolo shared a story some time back about when he was out in Hawaii. He was invited to come out to a conference and speak. And while he was there, his biological clock was in a different frame because he was from the East Coast and he flew out to Hawaii. And so he went out late one night. He couldn't sleep, and he went into a restaurant about 11 o'clock at night. And while he was having a bite to eat, he noticed there were some women of the night that came in as a group. And he overheard them talking. And one said, "Hey, Gwen, tomorrow's your birthday, isn't it?" "Yeah, that's true." "Well, what are you going to do?" "Oh, nothing. Nobody ever does anything on my birthday." And as he listened to her tell the story, a woman asked her if she'd ever had a birthday party, and she said, "No, I never have." And everybody just sort of shrugged their shoulders. And so Tony, afterwards, went up to the man at the counter, and he said, "Do those women come in every night?" "Yeah, about the same time every night. This is their break time." And he said, "Would you mind if I ordered a cake for Gwen tomorrow night?" And he said, "I think that would be wonderful." And the next night, the women came back, and Tony was there. And they came in, and then all of a sudden, the man behind the counter had told some of the other women, "There's going to be a birthday party for Gwen tonight." And they sang happy birthday to her. And she started to cry. And they said, "Who did this?" And they said, "That man over there." And one of the persons said, "Why did you do this for a prostitute?" And he said, "Because I serve a God who loves prostitutes." And she said, "I'd like to meet a God who loves prostitutes enough to have a birthday party for them." Isn't that a neat story? Unless we love sinners as much as Jesus does, we don't have a chance in the world, regardless of the tactics and gimmicks and doodads and gizmos that we use. We don't have a chance of bringing them to faith in Christ. Thank you.